very good word for the physician form of India. Really, this Warren is a child of Dr. Chauhan only, and he has been nursing it with all his efforts. And today we are having 775 CMEs. It is because of him. The other thing which I have to mention today is Dr. Sushruv. He is trying his level best to give all our CMEs on YouTube. And our CMEs are being watched in a big way. This is a very wonderful thing, and it does not happen with many of these classes. Today we are going to have Dr. Manish Paliwal speaking on gastrointestinal bleeding. This is a subject which we often get in our day-to-day life. I have had my nephew having very severe bleeding. He was admitted at 40 and had about 6 to 7 infusions, and with great difficulty one could stop the bleeding. So, as a physician, I feel this topic one should understand and listen to Dr. Paliwal very carefully and refer the patient whether it is required to him or to some gastroenterologist. Dr. Manish has very distinguished qualifications. He has his studies in Delhi, MBBS, MD, DN, and he has worked in India and abroad. He has been in Europe and he has been in UK, and he holds a MRCP degree which he does not write on his card, which is a big thing. Most of us, who has what MRCP, he writes and he feels a pleasure in showing his MRCP. Great, sir. And he is very experienced, and he is doing all the endoscopies and all complex sort of procedures. I will not take more time. I'll ask Dr. Manish to enlighten us on his subject. Thank you, sir. Please, sir.
Thank you, Dr. P.K. Gupta sir, Dr. Chauhan sir, and my distinguished senior colleagues. I am a very humble gastroenterologist, and today I would like you to enjoy the evening, and the talk will be very practical, simple, without any theory. It will just be a simple case-based approach with a few caveats which you just have to keep in mind. In fact, just 4 or 5 points, and that's enough for GI bleed. I take your permission to start. Today I am speaking on upper gastrointestinal bleed, and this will be a case-based approach. I am sure all my colleagues are aware what an upper gastrointestinal bleed is, but I'll just make it slightly simple. Any person who comes with a suspected GI bleed or somebody who has a GI bleed, we just start looking what is an upper GI bleed. And anatomically speaking, it's a bleed which is proximal to the ligament of teeth, which is basically the esophagus, the stomach, and the duodenum. This can be in the form of hematemesis, which we all know, melena. Characteristics of melena is black, tarry, smelly stools. Most people think that if they pass black or dark stools which are thick, that is melena. No, melena is always tarry, it's like coal tar. So a very good way is to ask the patient whether you have black, coal tar like stools or something which look like my hair. And this is a practical way of asking people, and if they say yes and it is smelly, unusually smelly, it is always significant even if there is one episode. Others are, we all know, hematochezia, and we know there is an occult anemia which a person comes with. What will be the symptoms of anemia? My colleagues would already know, but if somebody has lightheadedness, dizziness, sweating and some weakness, and we know that he looks pale, then that is anemia until proven otherwise. And then we start looking at the cause. So I will be introducing 4 cases, then we come back. Now this is and then we will talk on little bit basics and then we will come back. This was a 55-year-old male, diabetic, hypertension and coronary artery disease, recent PTCA, 6 months ago, had 1 episode of melena. He decided to meet his GP. He was on OHAs, dual antiplatelets, metoprolol, statins, telmisartan. At evaluation, his pulse was 92, blood pressure almost okay, but he appeared anxious. Abdominal, there were no findings. We'll look at the differential as we come forward later. The second case which I am introducing is a 30-year-old lady who is 10 weeks primary gravida, came with recurrent nausea, vomiting and heartburn for 3 to 4 weeks, very obvious. First trimester of pregnancy, this is all very possible. But in the morning she had 5 episodes of vomiting and the last one she said there was streak of blood. There is no history of NaCID. She was already on PPIs, Doxynate, Ondansetron and visited the nearby clinic. Evaluation, pulse was okay, blood pressure okay, no pallor, mild tenderness in the epigastrium, rest nothing. This lady was reassured and sent back home. But next day she had again 1 episode of hematemesis and this time she had melena. We'll look at the differential and how we will proceed. The third case I am introducing is a 47-year-old male presented with recurrent vomiting for last 1 to 2 days. He had 6 episodes of hematemesis since he came to the clinic. He is not a known case of coronary artery disease, no hypertension, but he had taken NaCID for a headache. He goes by to the nearby local nursing home where evaluation shows that he has tachycardia, 90 systolic blood pressure, he has a poor muscle mass, he has fetal edema, there is clinical ascites and there is a spleen tear which is palpable. So we look at the differential and how will we proceed. The fourth case, this is the last case we will discuss today. 38-year-old male, he is 38-year-old male, had epigastric pain for 2 months and this occurs within 10 minutes of eating. He has 6 kgs of weight loss, nausea, loss of appetite, 2 episodes of melena. He denies any other systemic illnesses or addictions. There is no history of NaCID intake. He visits his family doctor. Clinical examination except for mild pallor is absolutely normal. We look at the differential and we go move forward. So before if in our practices we ever encounter anybody coming with a GI bleed, just a basic few things. We have to look at the pulse, we have to look at the pulse rate, we have to look at the heart rate and we have to look at the blood pressure. Rest might not be important. So if we know that the heart rate is less than 100, very important is that a patient should not be on beta blockers. If patient is on beta blockers, then heart rate would be erroneous. And if there is a fall in blood pressure in our clinic, sitting and supine, or if we can manage supine and standing blood pressure more than 20 millimeters, not explained by neuropathy, definitely that is important. Rest all is for academic purposes. Of course, this will help us to understand which is the class of loss of blood volume this patient can have. Class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4. Class 4 is absolute emergency. That patient will generally not come to the clinic. Most clinic will encounter either class 1 or class 2. The top part is just the basic information. We just look for localizing symptoms, whether he presented with upper abdominal symptoms or with lower abdominal symptoms. Whether there is a history of prior GI bleed. This is always very important. Whether he has an NaCID or aspirin induced. 50% of people coming to the clinic will always be taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Even a single tablet of Brufen, diclofenac is capable of causing a torrential bleed. Just a basic information. Whether there is any history of liver disease. The down 4 are more for gastroenterologists, so I will not discuss much. A physical examination can be done within 2 minutes. What are his vital signs? Is there any orthostatic fall of blood pressure? Is there any abdominal tenderness? Abdominal tenderness will point us the sign. It's an upper abdomen or a lower abdomen. We can just quickly look for pallor and any stigmata of liver disease. Basically ascites, fetal edema and splenomegaly. And then the others are just descriptive findings. Please feel free to ask me questions. I would request questions that can be asked at any point of time if things are not clear. Just look at let's look at the basic differential of anybody having a GI bleed. We are talking about upper GI bleed. We have basically peptic ulcer disease, which is still quite common. We have varices, esophageal and gastric. We have erosive esophagitis, gastritis, duodenitis, malurivista. These are the basically top 4 etiologies. The others are there: vascular atasias, telangiectasias, neoplasms, gastric, pluripotent lesions. And we should never forget that there can be bleeding from the bile duct as well as from the pancreas, but they are rare. Just a basic quick workup: if we find a person is hemodynamically stable, no anxiety, no tachycardia, had a minor bleed, had no melena. If somebody has melena, we should basically be careful, but he has no melena, it was a minor hematomesis, no abdominal signs, then what we require at clinic is just a basic hemogram, liver function test, kidney function test, just to be sure that there is no hypertension or renal failure. To find out whether he is diabetic, they are more prone. Just a basic ultrasound to look for basically evidence of chronic liver disease, because nothing else will be helped by ultrasound. And plan an endoscopy if you suspect that the bleed can be significant or it has a potential to recur. Other studies are for completion, just for iron studies, echocardiography, CT abdomen, depending on the setup that the patient is. Sometimes people have melena, so it is worthwhile to think also whether a colon can be involved. So let's come back to our cases now. This 55-year-old diabetic, hypertensive, 30 to 40% you will have nothing in the eyes when you feel that it is erroneous. At this point, I would like to definitely bring to my esteemed colleagues: do not trust stool occult blood. Stool occult blood is an absolute erroneous thing. In India, we do only the QAG test. The fecal immunoglobulin tests are not available, which are human blood specific. They have a sensitivity still of 60%. That also they are repeated on 3 occasions. And most GI bleeds don't give you 3 occasions to repeat a stool occult blood. So it should not be in the diagnostic armamentarium of any person that we rely on stool occult blood. If you are not clear, better to evaluate little more. So the differential diagnosis, what we feel is this patient having a variceal bleed? I am sure my colleagues will be thinking, can there be a possibility of variceal bleed? Anybody, if you feel that we can debate on this, and anybody feels can he have a variceal bleed? Yeah, that's true, sir. So no clue from here. Can this be a peptic ulcer bleed? Less, most likely. It's likely. So this patient came to my clinic, and what can be done by anybody at any clinic is to give him a stat dose of 80 milligrams of pantoprazole and secure an IV line, because you never know what's inside it. So we can secure an IV line and start rushing in normal saline. Normal saline is good enough fluid just to be sure that he reaches the hospital or whichever place he is, or if he is in the ER, that can be done. This patient ultimately got admitted in our ICU. We started a PPI infusion. We gave him PAC cells. His hemoglobin was 6, and we underwent a gastroscopy. Now, at gastroscopy, he had with PPI infusion, and he had a large clot sitting in with a duodenal ulcer in the duodenal bulb, and subsequently he underwent a hemoclipping, and then in 72 hours of proton pump inhibition he received. He was orally allowed liquid diet from the same day, and then he went back home by the 5th day with normal. Now the only take home message was that we had to definitely start giving him PPI and this information and make him understand that he has to watch for further melena, and he should get his hemoglobin checked at least once in a month for a couple of months, so that there is no fall of hemoglobin. There is no immediate requirement of a check endoscopy or an endoscopy to be repeated after few weeks. That's not required. So this is the Rockwell score which has been used just for academic purpose little bit. The only thing here which we have to understand is based on the diagnosis. If you have a Mallory stare, it will be a very innocuous thing, but sometimes Mallory stare can be really problematic. But if somebody has a history of cardiac disease, significant renal failure, or ischemic heart disease, even a single episode of small amount of bleed is always to be taken significantly. Renal failure, liver failure increases your risk tremendously, and the most amount of risk is with somebody having a malignant disease or a metastasis anywhere in the body. Such people are always on multiple NSAIDs and they have to be taken with seriously. This slide is just for a slight academic purpose. Let's come to this patient had a peptic ulcer bleed. We definitely have to look at the H. pylori status. Despite being an NSAID bleed, if he has an H. pylori positive, we have to give anti-H. pylori triple duct therapy. And ideally, this patient should definitely be discharged on PPI once or twice, depending on what findings we found. At least 4 weeks of double dose and then single dose. And most importantly for him is if you have a cardiovascular disease, the take-home message is do not worry in restarting aspirin. Because if you have done a good hemostasis, aspirin can be started the same evening. With PPI cover, it is safe. And this is very important because the risk of having a cardiac event because of stress and other issues within the first 72 hours is immense. So the most important is that a cardiac event can kill. Usually upper GI bleed will not kill in today's era. So we have to start aspirin. Let's come to case number 2.
Doctor, it's inciting a lot of questions. Shall we have it now or after the talk? After the talk.
Okay. So let's look at this other lady. She has 10 weeks primary gravida, heartburn with episodes of blood streaking, one episode. May I request my esteemed audience to what would be their differential diagnosis? Mallory's, right? But she had a Mallory's from the first history. What about the second one? See, she was reassured and sent back. And second time, next day she had melena and again she had hematolysis. So, can it still be a Mallory-Weiss syndrome? That's what I wanted to read. Yes, that definitely we can think of stress-induced ulcers. Very right. This lady, I would like to bring two things in a Mallory. If you have a problem in Mallory-Weiss, this is definitely Mallory-Weiss. But if the problem like a pregnancy and a morning sickness is increasing, then the Mallory-Weiss can complicate. It can go further. So it would increase and we definitely keep a close watch. The only important message was she was informed to keep a close watch on melena. So if you have melena from an upper GI tract, you have lost at least 50 to 100 ml of blood. So if you lose 50 to 100 ml of blood, it is always should be given adequate importance. So the take-home message what I felt from this case was the practitioner informing the lady that watch for black tarnish too. So that was the important thing, and when she came to us, we kept a differential of GERD, less likely, although possible, peptic ulcer, cannot be ruled out, and a Mallory-Weiss. So the question was, should we go ahead with an endoscopy? Ladies are very worried, it's pregnancy, we have to allay their anxiety. Endoscopy is safe in first trimester, second trimester and early third trimester very easily, and there will be no risk to the mother. Then we practice very safe anesthesia, so it can be taken care of. And we found a Mallory-Weiss ulcer which was a large ulcer, it was across the junction, and this had a potential of a small vessel sitting here. But with BPI, this lady settled and we did not do any further intervention or no adrenaline injection or anything was required. Let's come to the third case. The third case we already know has 6 episodes of hematolysis and he has no other significant history except taking an NSAID. May I request my esteemed faculty what would they feel this patient would be having? Hepatic. Yeah. Exactly. So this patient, can we think of a peptic ulcer? Yes. Cirrhotics have lot of peptic ulcer. Should we think of a varicose bleed? This was a case which I had just done about 4 days ago. This gentleman is still admitted with us. And could we think of GERD? Least likely. Can we think of a tumor? You never know. Tumors can present anytime. So he was immediately, thankfully, the practitioner referred this patient after an IV line. When he came to us, this was the first endoscopy finding we saw. When I did an endoscopy at about 11 o'clock at night, this was the first finding. Now, if you can see that this is a very deep looking ulcer with an inside, it's looking like a tear. So it's like a very deep Mallory-Weiss ulcer. Then the next thing which we saw was there is a Mallory-Weiss here also. Then we see a very large gastric varix, very large gastric varix. There's a bleeding point here and there is a bleeding point here. Now this is a large gastric varix and I injected almost 5 ml of glue in this patient with 10 ml of distilled water at 4 sites. And then this finally the varix was obliterated. This patient was remained in the ICU for 48 hours, did well, no hemoglobin drop. His hemoglobin at presentation was 6.1. He received 2 PRBC. He kept his hemoglobin around 8. Now, in view of this Mallory-Weiss ulcer, it's such a deep ulcer, it's such a deep clot, I couldn't feed him orally. He passed in a nasogastric tube and he is getting nasogastric feed. Because if he vomits again and this gives way, then in a cirrhotic, he is child C status, I cannot afford surgery, he will just die. So, the surgery will be just like pushing him into a ventilator, so better we kept him NQ and he is getting somatostatin, he is getting Turley Crescent. He is getting Turley Crescent and and somatostatin, yes, if it is not available, the dose is 250 micrograms bolus at 250 micrograms per hour infusion and he is doing fine. Let's look at the last case that will end my talk by 2 questions. This is a 38-year-old male with epigastric pain for 2 months within 10 minutes of eating, 6 kg weight loss of appetite, 2 episodes of malaria, and no other history. Do you think we should refer this patient? Do you feel we should see this patient or we should give him just some basic treatment and watch? May I request my esteemed faculty to give their views? Yes, and his age is just 38. But how would you look at this weight loss? Why do you think he can have weight loss?
Gastric malignancy. Even if it is not malignancy, you have to do something.
So, the important clue is that he has nausea, loss of appetite, and weight loss. So, if you have pain after eating, it's a peptic ulcer. It's a peptic ulcer, but this ulcer definitely has got complicated and it is leading to nausea and loss of appetite with 6 kg weight loss. So 30-year-old male losing 6 kgs in 2 months has to always be seen. So GERD less likely, peptic ulcer definitely. Is there a malignancy? Definitely we have to think. Should we treat only H. pylori and give EPI and wait? I don't think nobody, as my learned faculty is like, I have to do nothing. Everybody knows. I agree, sir. I totally agree. Experience really counts, and that's what I am here for. Antrum, just before the pylorus, he never had features of gastric obstruction, and this gentleman was evaluated, underwent CT scan. Not having a spread disease, he has to be operated. He was operated. So the key message which I feel that upper GI bleed always requires a close follow-up, whether it is an innocuous bleed like a simple Mallory-Weiss, just make the person understand what a melena is. If a person can understand melena and is very clear he does not have melena, then we are safe, we can comfortably sleep. A gastroenterologist dreads the GI bleed at night. It always gives nightmare, still gives nightmare. I am into almost 18 years of my gastroenterology, 19 years of gastroenterology now, it always troubles me. And just history will give us the basic clue over 80% of the cases. Emergency management can start in the clinic. We can all give PPI. PPI, if somebody can have API and give him 80 milligrams, it tends to improve a lot of, decreases the mortality the first hours, like cardiac patients. And when in doubt, please refer and consider an early endoscopy. I'm sorry that as a gastroenterologist I have to tell you that, but that is what the dictum is. And thank you for your kind attention.
Very, excellent and practical and a nice talk from Dr. Paliwal. Sir, I have to ask one question from you. You said that, the test for occult blood stool has no value. I would like you to talk.
First of all, sir, I would request that whenever we think that we should send occult blood, I tell you how occult blood becomes positive. If somebody is eating broccoli, cabbage, turnip, iron tablet, no, we are just talking about vegetables, sir. Then, cauliflower, he brushes his teeth very vigorously and there is gum bleeding. And post-nasal, occult blood will be positive, it will be erroneous, over-investigated. Then, of course, iron, non-vegetarian food, everything will lead to occult. So, what in India we have is WAC-based test. That is just detecting some iron. It does not say which kind, and there is a lot of false positivity with that. Second is, if we suspect a GI lesion, the false negativity is very important. If we find that somebody says that melina, and we were sure or not sure, and we say that we said occult blood is negative, no, everything is okay, at least 40% of colon cancers or 60% of colon cancers can be missed. That is a practical way. At least 3, and that 3 makes the sensitivity to 70 to 80%. But the most important is human immunoglobulin test, which is not available. The FIT test, FIT, or what we call as hemoccult or heme sensor, it's not available. None of the labs I could come across is ever doing. And so, practically speaking, it is very difficult to, and if somebody is on ecosprin, if somebody has taken NaCID, it will always be positive. Then that is alarming to the patient or alarming to the doctor. So, both wise, it is best to use a clinical judgment and not rely on occult blood, especially the guaiac-based tests which are available in India. Therefore, in India, most gastroenterologists feel that we should not really worry about it. Rather, it is a better way to tell the patient, take a box, put your stool sample and bring it to my clinic tomorrow. I have been doing that. Most people who come with suspected GI references as a gastroenterologist, I take their consent, do a rectal examination, examine the stool. 9 out of 10, it is yellow. And they say that it was malignant. Patients are confused. Many times this happens, and the best is to do a rectal examination if the person is clear that today morning he had a stool which was malignant. Upper rectal examination will give us the full picture, because visualization of a black tarry stool, nobody will ever forget. Even if you are seeing one or two in a year. So therefore, stool occult blood to be abandoned, use the clinical sense, look at hemoglobin, that might be better. And compare it with the past. If your hemoglobin 6 months ago was 15 and you are having the same diet, and now it is 12, it is very important to evaluate, especially in the middle-aged group on.
Dr. Paliwal, very nicely said. We get a lot of patients who are having very small bleeding from the peptic ulcers. These are the patients who do not have much symptoms. They come to us with minor problems, although the hemoglobin is very low. In such patients, endoscopy is one thing which you can employ for seeing. But it's not available with us. So we go by occult blood only. So what is your opinion about this?
Sir, as I would say, sir, if you have somebody with peptic ulcer and low hemoglobin, endoscopy has to be done. There is, because looking at the unfortunate part in India is when I started my practice and I used to read books of gastroenterology, they used to say that things don't happen in India, you don't get malignancy before the age of 45. Today, I have seen 20-30% of young people are getting malignancy. We all see that in a clinic because of whatever pollution, whatever we have seen. Any person of peptic ulcer having a hemoglobin which is borderline low is a clear indication that you should go ahead and do an endoscopy. It is medical legally also important.
Yes, whenever in doubt, I think you must do it.
It is medical legally also important, sir, because people will look at Google, people will come and question you, and then if you can't explain the hemoglobin drop, go ahead and do the endoscopy.
Sir, the floor is open. Dr. Tulsi, Dr. Kalra, Dr. Podar, Dr. Chauhan, please ask. Thank you, sir. Please ask.
Thank you, Dr. P.V. Gupta, sir. And what a wonderful talk, Dr. Oliver. So, would you say the initial assessment evaluation should begin with assessing the hemodynamic stability and resuscitation if required? Agreed. Okay. Now, what about the hemoglobin? Before you do an endoscopy, would you like a hemoglobin to be at least 7 grams? And probably if you have a CAD and ongoing oozing, probably would say the hemoglobin of 8 grams would be justified?
Sir, the way forward is there are two ways. Now, if we are looking at an acute blood loss, the hemoglobin will not fall within 6 hours or 8 hours. So, the most important target is that if you find hemodynamic instability, you start a PPI infusion. You arrange for bloods, you start giving crystalloids. You arrange for endoscopy depending on the requirement. If you have ongoing angina, then you sedate the patient, intubate the patient and do the endoscopy. Because you will not stop the bleeding source, whatever amount of blood you give, is angina will not come. So it has to be 2 cannulas. Practically speaking, it has to be 2, 18 gauge cannulas, Russian colloids, crystalloids actually, normal saline is the fluid of choice. Go ahead, prognosticate the patient, sedate the patient and do a quick endoscopy. That endoscopy, within 10 minutes, if you find a peptic ulcer, you can burn it, clip it, it doesn't take some time more than 10 minutes. And then at least, then by the time, because blood is always practically not available in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. If we want to give a, just group specific, not cross-matched adequately as a life-saving, then it will be better to go ahead and stabilize and try to work simultaneously. Actually, 2 teams will have to work, the ICU team and the endoscopist team, with each other in parallel. And that will help.
So absolutely. So stabilize the patient and go ahead with an endoscopy. So the risk of upper GI bleed with that dual antiplatelets is, what do you say, about 2.7 to 3.7%?
No, it all depends which type which you are using, and it all depends on the age group.
I'm coming to that regarding the Credo and the Sense LIVD trial. So what did he say?
See, upper GI bleed depends on what is the. It has been seen with the newer dual antiplatelets, upper GI bleed risk depending on the age group, depending on the comorbidity, can be as high as 20%. When it was classically done with clopidogrel and other aspirin combinations, it was low, less than 5%. But as you started using the newer antiplatelets, the risk, the cardiacs, the mortality from cardiac risk decreased, but the upper GI bleed increased almost up to the role of 20% or 15% depending on the age group. So if you are 80 years and above, it could be significantly higher. If you are, so if you are 60 plus, the risks were less. So it all depends, and whether you had dual, so diabetics were more prone, and chronic renal failure definitely even more further prone, because they themselves are prone to platelet dysfunction, and therefore, so I would say that.
So most of the AP2 inhibitors probably are not ulcerogenic, but may cause bleeding due to its antiplatelet effects.
Of course.
Okay, sir. Now, regarding the use of NGT, would you say that probably NGT lavage indicated in patients with blood clots and particulate matter before you do an endoscopy?
Of course, that is a part of the preparation which a gastroenterologist does. That's the reason why. NGT would always help. That's what. And in fact, if you look at the Indian literature, we like to give metoclopramide. In the Western countries, they like metoclopramide is not available. They give erythromycin because it's a very good prokinetic. It helps in clearing the area, and then you can do a quick endoscopy. So NGT always helps, but NGT. The important caveat for NGT is do not trust that NGT is negative, is no upper GI.
Okay, sir.
The patient can be in shock and NGT will have nothing.
Right. Regarding the risk score, you talked about the locale, and what about the Glasgow Bedford score? See, because that is after an endoscopy, the former, the latter is before an endoscopy. And let me complete, sir. The modified GBS as good as the long GBS.
Sir, you should come with me and practice gastro. That's the best answer.
अब आपका तो बंद ही है जी
Please, sir, please.
So, second, practically speaking, let's be very practical. Look at the and do things. These scores are for academic purposes. To be very honest, I am not publishing a paper here. If I am not publishing a paper, I will practically go by what I have seen and what I would see. Anxious patient, tachycardia patient, on beta blockers, chronic renal failure. I know his poor prognosis. Better to stabilize him. If I have to publish as a case series, I will require all these scores. Even in the best of setups, to be honest, in this forum, it's not absolutely practical to follow this. Yes, we have all data, we want to later publish it, we can put on all these scores. We don't sit at the bedside to do any of this.
My last two questions, sir. Regarding the endoscopic therapy, see, maybe I talk about the ulcer, active squirting and oozing. So, what would you do? Do you do a bipolar electrocoagulation or absolute alcohol or ethanol?
Sir, I again say you must come with me to the endoscopy, sir.
Okay, sir. My
Next, today what we do actually is dual modality.
Right.
I'll just bring it very simple. The most important and the most efficient is hemoclip. So most efficient is a hemoclip. If you can put adrenaline, put in a hemoclip. Dual or quadri gold pro is a very good thing if you have a visible vessel. But it is not. It is technically demanding, and most people are not very well trained to do that. So hemoclip takes quickly, very quickly.
So last question, sir. So if endoscopy therapy fails, would you suggest a transcatheter embolization?
No, sir.
No.
No.
So what do you do? If this therapy fails, what do you do, sir?
It doesn't fail through my hands, sir. After that, if I fail, I tell the surgeon that you have to operate.
Thank
Because
you.
any GI bleed, endoscopically not managed, cannot be managed by embolization.
So
It all depends if you have an aberrant vessel. I had a very interesting case as a post-EPT bleed. That patient bled the third day. The first thing I did was angioembolization. I did not even do an endoscopy for him because I knew that it is not an endoscopically controllable bleed.
Thank you, sir.
सर आफ्टर एग्जॉस्टिव क्वेश्चंस बाय डॉक्टर तुलसी वैसे नवरात्रे चल रहे हैं मैं फर्स्ट वीक पे हूँ तो थोड़े से सवाल पूछूंगा डॉक्टर पोजार इज वेरी एंशियस माय इंटरेस्ट इज टू नो अबाउट दैट पेशेंट ऑफ CAD on dual antiplatelets who had upper GI bleed and was treated by you. So in future now, so did you change his type of antiplatelets, number one? Are the newer antiplatelets more safe in this regard? And how long will you use that PPI in this case? Because if you use PPI for long, there are inherent side effects also.
Sir, practically speaking, regarding this case, the first thing is to this patient was on Brilinta and aspirin. So Brilinta cannot be started immediately. Aspirin can be started immediately. We have to eliminate H. pylori because it has been seen that people who have H. pylori and a duodenal ulcer, even if you have not checked for H. pylori, you have to treat. H. pylori, if you treat, the risk of rebleeding on dual antiplatelets come down from 30% to 1 to 3%. Of course, we have to tell the patient that this is practical. As I always say, that stopping the antiplatelets in a recent PTCA invites him to get a cardiac event, thrombosis, and going standing in the court. And then, therefore, so this patient will get the aspirin as quickly as possible. Bring in a cardiologist. Let him see how the risk lesion was, how many stents were placed, where were the stents placed, where is the proximal LAD, and then quickly, as you know, within 48 hours or 72 hours, depending on the high risk lesion and how good the therapy was done, you restart the dual antiplatelets, maintain them, and the PPIs have to be continued lifelong.
Your preferred PPI in pregnancy, number one. And my last question is, does smoking, type of food, alcohol also add to the more chance of bleeding in those who are on dual antiplatelets?
Of course, smoking is a definite risk factor for every kind of GI bleed, upper GI bleed, lower GI bleed, and cancer complicated practical. Regarding alcohol, alcohol is an irritant. Alcohol is an irritant. It does not directly precipitate a bleed, but it's an irritant. So alcohol increases, and definitely dual antiplatelets have changed the world for a cardiac patient. But as I always say, it has to be parallel to each other. We have to give treatment. We cannot really ignore GI bleed, because if you have uncontrolled GI bleed or development of anemia, you will get a heart attack despite having a stent incident. So they have to be continued. PPI can be continued. Have to be continued ideally lifelong. To look at the side effects of a drug.